Well, welcome to the Display Kid podcast. And I want to introduce our first guest, Sarah. And Sarah has had an incredible career within visual merchandising and has worked for brands such as Lacoste, Victoria's Secret, Field Guide, APC, and most recently SKIMS as their Director of Global VM. But as with all of the guests, the reason Sarah is here isn't because of her title. That is all transient. What's really important is that we've had some initial connections, and I can already tell you're an amazing human. And it's really just an excuse to kind of get you here, have a conversation, and really understand some of the learnings and lessons that you've kind of picked up through your career. So the first thing I want to kind of talk about is we're going to focus a little bit more on your personal journey.
Sure.
So I always like to ask this at the beginning of the podcast and really get an understanding about 10-year-old. Well, let's say 7-year-old. 7-year-old Sarah. What was she like? What was she interested in? What were her passions? I really want to get to know like that version of you.
Yeah, interesting. 7-year-old Sarah was the youngest of 3 older brothers, and she really wanted attention, and like, you know, in a cute way, because she was cute.
Yeah.
But my brother was always video. He's a movie guy. He was making movies all the time. So I, of course, was like, well, I want to be the main. I'm Miss Green. I'm the one that's, you know, solving the Yeah. So I think at that point it was, I want to be a movie star. Be a star. I just like really picked up on what they were doing, and I wanted to do that. And I loved writing. I've loved writing since I was able to write.
Yeah.
So you know, I don't think I'm doing exactly what I thought I would be doing at 7. But,
yeah. So do you think there's? It sounds like there's quite a lot of what I'm finding with the guests is there's a lot of synergies between some of their interests and passions when they were a kid and what they're doing now. It feels like that you've always kind of had that creative spark. Would you say that that's
I would, yeah. My mom also did ceramics. So she painted, and we had kilns in the basement. So I was always doing things like that with her. So it was available to me at a young age. So I was able to explore sort of painting and doing things with my hands. And creating with my hands has just always been something that if it's writing, if it's drawing, or, you know, it was always something like that I was drawn to more than anything. So yeah, I mean, I think it's translated and it's sort of, you know, like a tree. We've branched off into all different places and like I've ended up where I'm at, but it's all been sort of brewing from that.
Now you, obviously we're going to get into this later, but now you're a mother. Do you think there is part of it? What do you think that nature versus nurture, what do you think that kind of balance has been in your life? Like, it sounds like there's been a lot of nurture.
Yeah.
Do you think you've always had it like in you?
I think that's such a tricky question. I think it is what's in you. I think honestly for a long time I probably went a different route. So I started at Anthropologie. I did visual merchandising, but I was a operational manager. And I remember just thinking, like, operations, I kind of have to follow this road for money. I have to follow this road for what the life I need to make for myself, which is really my dad's side of the world, right? It's like my mom passed away when I was 11. So not to say my dad's not creative, but I think I lost that creative side of like my nurture. Yeah. And my dad is more pragmatic and thinks of things that way. So I think I shifted at that point.
Yeah.
But then when I got that job, it was, I love visual merchandising. This is what I like to do, the creative. I like storytelling. I'm going to start setting tables and dressing mannequins. And then people are buying what I'm putting out. And it's like, that started getting me excited and back into it. So I sort of kind of weaved my way back into to the creative. So I think it's both. Yeah. But it's being able to know yourself enough to follow
It's funny.
The inner direction.
I was talking with one of our earlier guests about and again, I listen to a lot of I'm a bit of a nerd, so I listen to a lot of podcasts and books. But I remember, I've even got it in my notes. I listened to this podcast about childhood traumas. So not necessarily traumas that are in the moment and it changes everything, but we're all shaped by our childhood traumas. And you were just mentioning about, I'm quite interested about, I'll be very honest, for me, I grew up in a family, there was a huge amount of love. I never did not feel completely loved.
Which is great.
Which is super lucky. But I didn't grow up in a wealthy family. I grew up where my parents were living from paycheck to paycheck. And I remember being a kid and seeing and feeling this and thinking, whatever I do in my life, I have to make money.
Yeah.
I have to make money because I'm not strong enough to do what they're doing.
Right.
When you talked about this money side, how much of a driver was that? Because VM isn't necessarily...
It's not. It went the wrong direction.
Yeah. When you get to level, I think there's money.
Yeah.
But
yes. No, I think again, I was the youngest of 3 older brothers, and then my dad got remarried, and then I had 5. I now have 5 older brothers and then a sister. So we just Brady bunched it. We just became all one. But I think, I've never been married, and I think there was this thing in my brain, a patriarchal thing of, my dad used to say, you're going to have to marry a rich man because so you can do it. And that stuck with me. And it's like, I don't want to, I want to be to quote Cher, I want to be the rich man. I want to be the one that's doing what I want. And I'm a single mom and I'm providing for the 2 of us, and I'm providing a really good life for the 2 of us, we're trying to.
Period.
So I think I've been honestly fighting that my whole life. It's this, to speak of nature versus nurture again, I think I was instilled with this thought of I'm going to have to find someone else to do this for me.
Yeah.
And
so do you feel like it's I totally get it. It feels like that has given you a huge amount of energy to achieve what you've kind of achieved, because you haven't wanted to go down that route.
Right. Yeah. And I think, during the pandemic, you spoke of Field Guide. That was a store that I helped my friend open. We opened in Santa Monica. It was incredible. This amazing space. And then the pandemic hit, and Owen and I had just moved out there and couldn't work for it anymore because, they had shut the store down. And it was a moment of, it was terrifying because I know that I'm good at visual merchandising, but it was this weird place where retail shut down. So you can't find a job in what you're good at because it doesn't exist right now.
Yeah.
And I am alone with a 4-year-old, 3-year-old that I have to provide for. And it was a really scary feeling. And I think it put me in a place of, I know I'm good at what I do. I know that I can make enough money to provide for us. I'm not trying to be the richest person in the room. I'm just trying to provide a nice life. And I don't want him to feel ever like, oh, we were struggling. I don't ever want him to feel that. I don't think he will. But even when I don't have money, it's not a point of conversation. It's like, I just want him to feel loved and safe. And he's changed my life in that way because I'm doing everything a little differently. Wow. This is even getting me obviously, well, I became a dad congratulations
4 weeks ago, and everything has shifted for me in the last 4 weeks, and I'm so in awe of what you've done. I'm massively in awe. I genuinely mean that. Even having just had 4 weeks of it, I am absolutely obsessed with this child, and I now I know that I will do whatever it takes to give him that same life. And like you said, it isn't about being the richest person in the world. It's making sure that your child feels loved. But that, like you mentioned there about the not feeling like anything's absent is, and that's incredible. Wow. Didn't expect to go so quickly.
I tend to do this with my...
it's amazing. And I think more than, see, to me, that is way more impressive than I honestly think that titles are just transient. I really do. When you kind of start your career, it is the most important thing, money and title.
Totally.
And status. And then the further you go, you realize, like you said, when things like the pandemic happened, that it's transient and you can lose it at the moment.
Exactly.
And if if you're defined by your job title and that goes, you're going to be in a mess.
Yeah.
And
I think a lot of people in our generation, or at least between my friends, we did that. Like a lot of my friends who've, kept growing through the ladder, like it's like, oh, well, this is my job. And I put so much of myself into this that it's like very important to me. And I think that's great. Of course it's important. What we do with our lives is very important. But I think if you take the outside, like, what are we living for then? Why are we doing that job? I think it's really important to keep that piece of you.
Yeah.
I don't know. And I think the journey of having a child, like I'm not a dad, I'm a mom, but who I was died, who I was before died when Owen was born. Like I was reborn.
Yeah.
And then it took, I don't know, it's still taking time. Like I don't know who I am now. I'm like a reborn person that has to figure out life. So between, that first year and I would say 5, 6 for him, I was trying to be a mom and a professional and a friend and a daughter. Like I don't know how to be all of those things all at once immediately, because you're trying to raise a person, and again I'm alone, so I'm doing it all all by myself, and a therapist also. Very important. But it's just
and it's funny you're talking about this reborn moment, because you don't have to talk about it. I'm going to talk about my experience, but I definitely had that reborn moment when my dad passed away.
Yeah.
And everything from that moment shifted. And I was a different person after that. And, so I get what you're saying about this shift. Like I was always my dad was always the person in the family that if anything went wrong, he was the one that everyone went to. And even when my parents divorced, my dad was always still that person in the mix. And then when my dad passed away, it was, even though I didn't really use it much like my brothers did and my younger brother did, but my dad was always a safety net. And when my dad passed away, I didn't have to, but I guess I assumed that role within the family of being the safety net for everyone.
Yeah.
And so I get that idea of rebirth. Like it really does kind of define you. And weirdly for me, it happened at a point. I've been working for this company for 13 years, and my dad had finally started to understand what visual merchandising was, because I was getting to travel all across. Yeah. So he was like, okay, maybe there is something in this.
Right.
And
sounds like a dad.
yeah. My dad was a vet, so veterinary surgeon. So he was like, why I don't understand what you do. Right. Come into my profession. And and I remember when he passed away, and weirdly, I was filled with like this incredible energy. Yeah. That my career in those 13 years was good, but in the next 3 years, the trajectory of my career just went through the roof. Right. And I honestly do think it's because in that moment I was like, shit, it's basically there's no safety net. You've got to make this right. It's you, and I think that's a big thing.
That's so interesting. I mean, I think that like I felt that, but in a different way, because it was home. My mom to me was home. Well, not that my dad isn't. Yeah. But you get something from your mom, and as a mom now, like God, I wish I had my mom. I love my stepmom so very much, but like there's just something about that. She's home. I'm his home. It doesn't matter where we live. Yeah. I'm home. So to speak to like the rebirth, I feel like I used to think it was, before and after, like there was the before and then after she died, but now it's almost 3 parts. It's like the before, the during, and then after he was born. It's sort of like 3-part series of life. But yeah, I think I was 11. So, I couldn't tell you how it changed me, because I don't know. I don't know. It's sort of like, I don't know who it would have been. Yeah. But I think that makes sense that you shifted that way, and like.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a correlation.
I think so too. Yeah.
So I'm gonna take it a little lighter now. Right.
But like, we haven't cried yet, so that's good.
No. So everyone has a story of how they ended up in visual merchandising, and like, or a person that kind of took them in that direction. I'd really love to know your story.
Yeah, great. Yes. So I am from Ohio. I was going to I went to Ohio University, and they have a great journalism program. And so I was like, I'm going to go into journalism, be an English major. I'm going to, I don't know, write books, whatever. And then one person told me, you're never going to make money if you do that. And I was like, oh, well, then I'll change into retail because that's going to do it. But I just shifted. And in my mind, I was like, okay, I'm going to shift into retail merchandising, but I'm going to be a designer. But they didn't have a design school at OU. So essentially, I went from English major to retail merchandising, thinking I was going to be in design. And then from there was like, the part of retail merchandising that I like is the visual merchandising.
Yeah.
So like I said, I graduated with that. There were no literally not one design class.
Yeah.
So I ended up like not even being able to do what I wanted to do. But just 4 years later, I had a degree. So, and then I moved to anthropology. I started working in anthropology. And honestly, like, I have to say that was the best place to start a visual journey, because I started small. I worked up my way in the field, and you are the owner of your own business. So I got to do whatever I wanted. Like in Columbus, Ohio, they care, but they're not coming to visit very often. So I just started there, and then I was like, I want to go to the next thing. I want to be the senior. I want to be the one that's telling them how to tell the stories. Like, it just really continued going. Wow. And I think I had just posted this on LinkedIn, but I think this a lot, that like, I like to storytell, and it just shifted from words to apparel. Like, it was just like, I'm still telling stories. I'm telling color stories. I'm telling texture stories. Emotional stories, physical, like touch with your hand stories. So it just sort of went that direction, and then I never looked back.
Yeah. I think from my experience, where I've met like senior visual merchandisers that have come from more of a high street background, they tend to be much more rounded, because you have to be able to operate in a commercial and a creative space.
Right, exactly.
And whereas I think if you're purely working in a luxury space, you're not always thinking commercially. Whereas to your point, like you would have to stand in front of a store manager and be like, the reason that I want to lay the store out this way is because I can increase the penetration on this category by 10%. If you leave this a week, I promise you we can review it again. And you had to really talk in a language that they understood, which is commercial.
Right. And the display piece of it, like Anthro, you call yourself the display kid. And it's like, I think about all of my DCs and like endless long nights of creating, paper mache trees in the middle of the store, and like how much I loved that. And I actually, I went on a date once, and I was like working in Soho Anthropology. Yeah. And I was so excited because we were doing these paper mache, like huge flowers. And I was just talking about it the whole time. And at one point he was like, do you have anything else to talk about, or is it just work? And I was like, oh. I was like, oh, well, okay. And then I didn't have anything else to talk about, so it ended. But
that sounds like me and my wife. She gets very fed up of me talking about these things. But it's, again, talking about that commercial piece, I don't think it's any coincidence you probably got to where you are in your career, because once you get to a certain level, everyone within the business talks that language of commerciality. Right. And I think if you're going to kind of move to a high level within visual merchandising, you need to be able to talk in a language people understand. Yes. And even though we're wide in a creative way, you still have to be able to talk in a commercial way. Otherwise, you're not going to get any buy-in from the wider business.
And I think it's important to make sure you're doing your job well. Mm-hmm. Like we're doing our job essentially to sell the product, right? And that's in the scheme of things, it boils down to making sure people see it and want it. And you've got to make sure you get the buy-in from the retail side and the operational side, so that also they want to follow what you're doing. Because I find that I find there's also resistance, and in like you have that tug and push and pull with operations and visuals. If you don't speak to them in a way that's like, I'm not just doing this because, like I have a reason behind it, then they're more likely to use paper when they're folding products, or if there's the little things that you're like, I just want you to paper fold these so they look good, and they're like, but why? You got to have a why behind it, so that you can have people following
Yeah.
trusting you, essentially.
No, I love it. Next thing again was, can you share like a defining moment that was at the very beginning of your career that you were like, yeah, I'm kind of doing the right thing now. So it's not necessarily a huge career achievement, but it was the moment that you were like, I'm on the right path.
Mm-hmm.
It's a tricky one.
It is. I don't know that there's not one that like
Maybe it was lots of little things
into mind. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I would say I always loved visual merchandising. It's always been something. I would write emails to my family and be like, this is what I'm doing, like on that same point of talking about these paper mache. I was really excited about those paper mache flowers. But
do you have any pictures?
I could probably find some. Just empty.
We're gonna cut that in.
I know they're going to be like so funny looking now I look back. But I actually think that I, moved up in Anthro and then I went to Lacoste, and that was a more corporate environment. And so, I'm doing less of the creative, which I needed at the time. I think there's an ebb and flow, and it's just like you get burnt out. And so then moved to Victoria's Secret and was doing sort of that same, corporate, less creative, more people to do more jobs, whereas I'm so used to wearing all the hats. And that kind of hit that point where he was born. I was at Victoria's Secret. Everything felt like, what am I doing? And then my friend was like, I'm going to open a store. Come help me build this. And I was like, yes. And that was the moment that I was like, this is what I want to be doing. Like, we built the store from nothing, she's an incredible artist. So, her ideas and me kind of supporting her ideas and merchandising the space from a box to what it became was that moment for me, because it was like, I'm listening to her, but I'm not listening to anybody else. You're kind of like, and everything I've learned has brought me to this point. She also worked at Anthro, so we knew each other for, now at this point we know each other for 20 years, but we'd been working together for a long time. So we understood each other. And I think that for me was a point of like, I've done everything I've done to get me to this point.
Yeah, it's funny. I came across this in another episode where it feels like you're most happy when your purpose is to create.
Yeah.
And it doesn't. That's why we were saying title really doesn't mean anything, because at that moment, people would be like, oh, she was in this job, she was in that job, now she's doing this, but
Right.
that was when you were most closest to your purpose and creating, like, it's just an incredible thing, visual merchandising, being able to take a blank canvas and create from scratch. It's a really special thing. The next thing I wanted to talk about was kind of setbacks and lessons. I'm quite a spiritual person, and I honestly do believe that everything happens for a reason. You don't necessarily see it in the moment, but when you zoom out, there's a reason for everything. Like, my personal career hasn't been linear, but I'm quite interested to understand, like, how has your career kind of progressed?
Right.
Do you feel like it's been quite linear, or ups and downs?
Oh my gosh, so many ups and downs. I think it was linear for quite some time, because I think I had my mind set and I was like, this is what I want to do. So essentially through the Anthro, I was there. Anthro to Free People, it was probably almost a decade. And that was like, my goal is to be the district visual manager. I had that goal, and I just kept working towards it. So it got to that point. And then probably when I got to that point, I had a moment of, why do I want to get to this point? And I actually went back to school for design. I went to Parsons to go back for design. So I kind of I was like, wait, what I wanted to do 10 years ago was be a designer. Why don't I'm in New York City, go back to school and do that again? So I'm working at Free People full time as the, visual manager of Rock Center. And then I'm back in school, and it was all like too much. Like, I can't do all of that all at once. Or I was doing it all at once, and then decided I don't want to do this job anymore. So I took a step back, and I left the company and just took some time. And then that's when I moved into Lacoste, because it was like, it's too much creativity. There was too many voices. It was a lot of, I wasn't able to prioritize in that time, like what made the most sense for me. So I just needed to leave it.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes you just have to believe it. And I didn't feel good about it at that time. I think, you know, I was probably felt down on myself or, you know, like, how did I get to this point? And I think it happened a couple times too. Like that was probably that moment where I left Free People and I focused on finishing school and just took some time away. Honestly, I look back and I wish I could do that every couple of years. You know, like take time and reset.
Yeah.
It was really good. But like I said, at the time, it didn't feel great. Like, you know, it felt like I maybe was failing myself.
But was that because you actually felt you were failing, or did you feel that it was maybe, because I know personally, I've realized now that I used to put a lot of focus on what other people thought about my career.
Yeah. A little bit of both. I think I put so much pressure on myself to get there and grow and be good. Like, it was always, what's the next thing? As soon as I'd get the job, I'd be like, okay, I want the next job. And instead of going, maybe taking a moment to go, what can I do better? I was just like, I am better. I'm going to, you know, it's just go. And I got there, but like maybe didn't learn all the lessons along the way. So maybe it's okay to go a little slower and work your way up a little slower, because you're going to get to the point where you're burning out. And, you know, I think, I think I was really disappointed in myself and worried about what people were going to think, because then I was just jobless.
Yeah.
And then it's the scary thing of finding your next job. And, you know, like you had mentioned earlier, this they look at your resume and they say, well, why? You know, I had school. So for me, it was easy to say, well, I needed to take a step back from school. But reality was, it was school, but it was also, I just needed to get out of that job for a minute. And then I got into Lacoste and that trajectory, and it was like night and day with sort of the style of VM it was. And it was great. And I did that for a while. And then like I said,
life changed
again, as it does.
Yeah.
But I've always known that I love I love visual merchandising. Like you mentioned, a blank space and creating. It's the step back moment where you're just like, I created. Look at this. People are going to love this when they come in the store and see what we've done. And it's such a instant gratification. Yes. It's that instant feeling.
I remember being on a store visit in Amsterdam, and I had one of my team was with me on the trip, and she was like an incredible merchandising women's wear. Yeah. And I remember being in the store and doing a walkthrough with her, and I'd done menswear upstairs, and I came down, and the product manager was in tears because the store looks so good. No, if it'd been me merchandising, it probably would have been the opposite. But I was like, I can't believe she's brought that woman to tears because it looks so good.
But have you? This reminded me of a moment I had when I was visual merchandiser of Soho. Yeah. We were trying to hire an assistant, so she would have been like visual, but also ops. And I just had her merchandise a belt fixture, just merchandise this belt fixture, and I walked away and did whatever, and I came back, and she explained it to me, and I literally cried because of her of a belt fixture. Like it wasn't even, a wall of apparel. It was just, okay, so I thought about this and I thought color. And then because of the color, I did just like the thought that someone puts into it. Were you really good at puzzles as a kid? I feel like that's what we do.
Yeah. I did like puzzles. Yeah.
I feel like what we do is a puzzle. It's just like a creative puzzle. And I think it's also this beautiful thing of understanding where people are coming from, because I didn't think of it that way. Or like, it's just, I think people's minds and visual merchandising are such an interesting.
I think you get two types of VMs. Both are equally as valid. Like, I'm definitely someone who I've worked with people in my team, had some incredible individuals that are pure creatives. Yeah. Like they can walk into a space, not even have to even articulate what they're doing, but they can just create this incredible thing. And I'm like, I can't do that. And then, whereas I would say I'm 50% creative, 50% analytical, I think that I've kind of taught myself over the years to follow a process in my head that has just become like automatic now, which is, like you said, color flow, balance. All of these things are in my head, and but I think some people are just that those like computer movements don't even go on. They just do it.
It's the vibes. But it's hard. I think that's an interesting. You're right. There is that sort of two types of merchandiser.
Yeah.
I think it's what's hard about the creative, and I've found myself sort of maybe in both of those categories, but what's hard is you have to be able to explain.
Yeah. Otherwise it's
Right. And I do that sometimes still, where I'm like, okay, this just feels wrong. But I have to be able to back it up, because feeling doesn't like they're not going to understand a feeling.
Yeah, I probably controversial, but I think that even in a lot of senior visual merchandising roles, to your point, I think that the people that I've seen that have done extremely well are the people that can kind of do both.
Yeah.
But a lot of businesses just hire that really super creative individual that can just do amazing things. But if they can't articulate that to a team, if they can't pass on their knowledge to it, and so that can be like amplified.
Right.
I've worked in businesses where they've hired senior visual merchandisers purely for their creative ability, and I've seen teams completely decimated. It's a really tricky thing.
I think it's like, if you find that person, you have to find their yang. Like, you need the yin and yang. You need that other piece of it to make sure that everything underneath makes sense. Like, 100%.
If you're going to hire that super uber creative person, then hire someone who's going to be their number two.
Yes, exactly. Who knows how to interpret them.
Yes.
Essentially, an interpreter.
Literally.
A creative and their interpreter. Yes.
And it's I've seen that so many times. Next thing I want to talk about is like we're going to two things really, and you can answer them in whichever way you want. It's almost your biggest career highlight, but also your biggest personal highlight, and whether they're in any way connected. One of our earlier guests, Sam, maybe similar for you, like his biggest personal highlight or achievement really was the creation of his daughter, which is true, which I can kind of definitely relate to now. And I'm interested to know, like, professional, personal, like, what are the things that have been your biggest things?
Oh boy. Okay. I'd say I have two on both ends. So professional would be Field Guide, because that was
from zero.
Yeah. And it was with somebody I love and admire, and it was this monumental thing. This like beautiful thing that was in reality small. Like, we weren't, a huge business. We were one store, but it felt so big. And